All right, I think we can get going here. How are we all doing? We have a good weekend? Yeah? You guys look kind of sad, in pain. I'm trying to look happy and not in pain. Yeah, I think, well, if we can try to have a happy, good attitude, we will have a better class. All right, so we, last week, we're talking about, well, who we are sociologically, and I asked you to talk about how you describe yourself, and we put a lot of categories on the board. And what we sort of determined from all of that is that one, there's lots of ways to describe yourself sociologically. There isn't a single right answer to that question. But one of the ideas we proposed was that sociologists focus on certain things like your class, your race, your gender as being sort of the big three. But there were a lot of other groups that we belong to. And so one way to describe sociology is that it's the study of social groups, groups like families, like religions, like countries, like neighborhoods, communities, schools. Almost anything that you could call a social group is something that sociologists try to study and try to understand better. But that's a very bland, broad definition that doesn't tell us that much. And so we want to dig a little further into this question. And one way that I want to introduce us to sociology is to start with, sorry, muted. I don't know why it's echoing like that, but it's still echoing. Hopefully people at home, hopefully this is recording at home. I'm not sure it's recording my audio, but I hope it is. If not, I'll have to redo this video. But, and I'm also gonna try something here, which is trying to, they told me this thing itself is a touchscreen whiteboard, so I'm trying to do that. So what we're gonna do is look at what I call key terms. These are key terms that we're gonna be using throughout this course. And the very first one is the one that was most relevant to what we did the other day, trying to understand who we are sociologically. And I'm seeing, maybe I can use the stylus from my. So the first term that we're going to learn is called the sociological imagination. The sociological, can you guys see this? Do you think it's better if I write on the board or on this?
On the board.
Is it better on the board?
Yeah. It kind of takes a lot longer on the.
Yeah,
It's a lot messier too.
it's a lot messier, yeah, and I don't know if the people at home are gonna be able to see it when it gets recorded, but hopefully they will. I'm gonna bring in the camera a little bit more. All right, so I'll write it up here, sociological imagination. So most of us aren't gonna go on to be sociology majors. And so I start this class with an idea that should be useful to you whether or not you ever take any more sociology classes. As I said the other day, we're all already sociologists. If you're a member of society, of social groups, you've had to learn over time how to operate in those social groups. Things like the rules people follow, that's what sociologists call norms, or the things like hierarchies.
I'm sorry, Norm. I have a student who's been looking for you. We thought you were in 1170. It took us a minute to find you.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I asked for a room change, but we haven't been able to make the change yet, so we decided to stay in here today.
Oh, I mean, it's official on the schedule.
I understand, but I didn't get a chance to tell them, and I haven't figured out the technology yet.
I'm so sorry.
We're just trying to figure out how to use whiteboards, and I still can't figure out the one in here,
Oh
so.
gosh, I'm sorry.
But yeah, if they want to come
Oh,
in.
come on.
Hi, sorry about that.
Um,
You're just adding the class now? Okay, why don't we talk after class? All right, so all of us are already sociologists, even somebody who just walked in right now, you're already a sociologist, I didn't know that. And so, but there's a reason to study sociology, which is to get better at being a sociologist. But the very first concept we're going to talk about is the idea of a sociological imagination. And this is the idea that sociology is in some sense just a way of thinking, a way of understanding who you are sociologically and understanding your society better. And so this concept comes from a guy named C. Wright Mills. I don't want to burden you with a lot of names of people, but it's true that in the world of sociology, we spend a lot of time talking about names of people who came up with sociological ideas. That's partly because there's a lot of disagreement in sociology over the ideas. And so rather than saying this idea is just true, we say, well, according to this person, this is what they say, but this other person says this. And C. Wright Mills is one of the famous sociologists. In fact, my brother was named after him. My dad liked C. Wright Mills so much. And he was an American sociologist writing in the 1940s and 50s. As we're going to learn in this class, sociology started a lot longer before this. It started earlier in Europe, in places like Germany and France in the 19th century, the 1800s. But we're talking about C. Wright Mills, and he was writing most of his work in the 1940s and 1950s especially, and 1960s. One thing about the 1950s that we think about when we think about America, and part of what makes this class challenging for students, I think, is that we talk about history and how things used to be and how they are now. And if you don't have a whole lot of sense of how things used to be, it can be challenging. But maybe you've seen movies about the 1950s or TV shows. There was a TV show I used to watch when I was a kid called Happy Days, which was about the 1950s. And supposedly the 1950s in America were happy days. Times when America was the leading country in the world. We just won World War II. We seemed to be rich. We seemed to be getting along in terms of race, in terms of other groupings. And so America, when we look back on that time, we say, well, that was when America was great. And, we have some people nowadays saying they want to make America great again. And I don't know what period they're talking about, but the 1950s seems to be a time when, rock and roll was happening and everybody was, in poodle skirts and all that kind of stuff and leather jackets, and it was supposedly a happy time. Well, Mills was writing at this time, and he said, maybe a lot of Americans are cheerful robots. What's a cheerful robot? He looked at America and he didn't necessarily see happy people. He saw what he called cheerful robots. What do you think he's getting at there? What does it mean to be cheerful? Does cheerful mean you're happy? Yeah. I asked you when I came in, I said, can you guys be more cheerful? Does cheerful mean you're happy? Because you have a smile on your face, you're happy? Yeah. Hi, I'm Sandy. Welcome to Applebee's. Can I take your order? Can you shoot me after that? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes putting a smile on your face doesn't necessarily mean you're fully happy and fulfilled inside. You're cheerful. You look happy. But are you happy? So when Mills says a lot of Americans are cheerful robots, what's he trying to say about Americans in the 1950s? That they're happy? What's a robot? Are you guys cheerful robots, or are you happy humans? Or are you just unhappy humans? Are you angry humans? Are you rage-filled humans? I don't know what you are, but I think you're tired humans. A lot of you look tired. But what's a cheerful robot? I mean, is that a good thing to be? What's a robot? Are you a robot? Well, I'm asking the class, and I'm asking you to not be robots. Robots have nothing to say. In fact, a lot of students today want to use robots, I guess. They want to use ChatGPT or something to write their paper. I don't let you be robots. I'm talking to you humans, and I'm not going to keep going on the class, but I'll still test you on it if you refuse to participate. So not to threaten you or anything, but I do expect participation. That's part of this class. So when I ask, what's a robot? Is that a good thing to be? Do you want to be a robot?
Robots might be brainwashed.
Brainwashed meaning what?
Sure.
Are robots brainwashed? Do they have brains?
No.
What do robots have? Why do robots do what they do?
Because they're programmed.
Because they're programmed to. Somebody told them to do it. So if you're a cheerful robot, are you a happy, free American?
No.
you're a controlled thing that's pretending to be happy. In other words, Mills looked at America and said, yeah, we might be the richest country on earth at the time in the 1950s. We might have just won World War II, but I'm not sure Americans are totally happy. Who's he talking about? Who wasn't happy? Well, what do you know about what's different now versus then? For one thing, throughout most of America, you had segregation. So if you were a black person, you had to, especially in the South, had to drink water at certain fountains, eat at certain restaurants, ride certain trains, be in a certain part of the bus. So for America to say, we're happy and everyone's great in America and it's the greatest country, well, for a lot of black people, it wasn't fair and just. A lot of women were supposedly happy in the 1950s. A lot of them got to be housewives. The idea then was that if a man works, he makes enough money for the woman to stay home, and her job is to take care of the home and take care of the appliances. And it turns out a lot of women wanted more out of life than just being a housewife and vacuuming their, supposedly women were supposed to feel totally fulfilled because your children are at school, your man's at work, and you've got the house to yourself to make it nice and beautiful for when everyone comes home. And it turns out, as we know now from the feminist movement, that a lot of women said, well, I don't want to just be at home with nobody ever seeing me. I want to be out in the world. I want to have a job. I want to have a name. I want to have accomplishments. My husband has those. I don't get to have those. And so a lot of women were saying America isn't fully equal and we're not getting to be our full selves. We're being like robots. In fact, there's a name for those Stepford wives, these housewives that just do what they're supposed to do, do what they're told. And a lot of women didn't want to be doing what they're told. A lot of young people too were saying, hey, do we have to listen to the adults all the time? Or are we just robots that have to do what we're told all the time? And young people started rebelling. I don't know if you know about the whole youth movement, and people started saying, no, we're not going to listen to dad. Father doesn't know best, and we're not going to do exactly what they say. So Mills was saying, you look at America and you see a lot of apparent happiness, but he thinks, I think, he said, people have what are called private troubles. They have things they're dealing with in their private life, and they don't feel comfortable telling other people or saying to the world that, hey, this is not happy for me. What kinds of things? Well, the things I'm just mentioning. A woman who's stuck at home and feels like she doesn't get to really be herself and feels like she's being dominated by her husband and by her children. Black people who feel like they never get to be their full selves because they don't get to do the things that white people get to do. Young people who feel they're overly controlled by the adults. A lot of other groups, in those days, for example, if your sexuality was not heterosexual, you were called queer, you were supposed to stay in the closet, and no one was you could never be who you were. So a lot of people so Mills was saying, I think a lot of people are suffering quietly in their own skins without telling the world that they're upset. And what really they should be doing is turning these private troubles into public issues. That the only way a society gets better, the only way you can turn these people into actually happy people who are actually free, not just cheerful robots, is to bring out the problems that are in society and bring them out into the open so people can discuss them and find solutions to them. And so how do you do that? How do you take a private trouble like, a housewife who's not happy with her marriage, with her life being a housewife? A lot of women in those days called it the problem that has no name, because women couldn't really talk about it. If you were to complain about, I get to be at home all day with no work and I get to take care of the refrigerator, it sounds like you're being really selfish to complain about that because it's a pretty nice life. And so a lot of women didn't complain about it. Or if the problem was your husband, does things in the bedroom and he gets happiness, but you didn't get any, and I don't want to be too graphic about it, but in those days too, it wasn't expected that the woman was going to get any pleasure. It was her job to please the man. And that was not something people wanted to talk about out in the open, but it was an issue women were facing. And so Mills says these are private troubles, but to fix them, we have to somehow bring them out and be open. And so he said the sociological imagination is what people need to develop. Regular people need to develop their ability to see these issues as not just private and unsolvable, but as things that are worth talking about and can be changed and can be solved. So what does that mean to have a sociological imagination? It's a way of thinking. It means to analyze. So the sociological imagination, what is it? The definition of it is it's to analyze the intersections between biography and history. That was how Mills put it, C. Wright Mills. What does that mean, to analyze the intersections between biography and history? Well, biography, that's your life story, a person's life story. Your biography is kind of what I asked you to give me the other day when I asked you, who are you sociologically? But I didn't expect you to give a fully sociological answer to that question because you haven't taken the class yet and haven't developed your sociological imaginations yet. But when we ask, who am I? Most of us give our kind of biography. Well, where was I born? When was I born? Where have I lived? What have I done with my life? Who are my parents? Who are my brothers and sisters? That kind of thing. It's your life story. And so what's history? History is social groups' life stories. So every group that a person could be part of also has a history to it, a story of it, when it was born or when it came into being, what it's been doing, what it's dealt with. And so you as a person, when you ask yourself, who are you sociologically, which is what I asked you last week, and if you're going to really think sociologically about who you are, according to Mills, you have to think about who you are, what your story is, but how does it connect with and intersect with this? So for example, when I asked you, who are you sociologically? Well, I said, the big three for sociology are things like your race, your class, your gender. Whatever race you are, if you're a member of the white race, if you want to call it that, that has a history to it, where it's been, what it's done. If you're a member of if you're a Latina, you're a woman, you're Chicana, you are a Californian. Those are three groups right there that have histories to them. And your own life story intersects with those. One way to, and what does intersect mean? Well, come into contact with, come up against. So the one, if you need an image to imagine this, I like to think of history as a river. There's this big river out there. And there's a lot of streams feeding that river. Each stream feeding that river is a social group. There's like the social group called Americans, the social group called women, the social group called students, the social group called people from Yuba County. I mean, there's all these groups you're part of, and they all have a history, and they feed into this big stream. And there's all these other social groups on planet Earth that are feeding into that stream. And you are like a little reed. You're a little blade of grass at the bottom of the river, growing up in that river. And that river is coming at you. And it pushes you this way and that. And you're trying to just grow up and get to the surface of the river so you can get some oxygen up there or sunlight or whatever. And the river is pushing you this way and that. But you're pushing back on the river a little bit too. You, by your very existence, are entering the stream of history, the river of history. And it's affecting who you can be and who you are, but you are affecting it. And if you can understand as a person that you aren't just a product of history, just a victim of it, but are a member of it, that's beginning to think sociologically about who you are. And so when you think about your private troubles, what are the troubles I face, the things in my life that I want to change, that suck, that are unjust, that are gross, whatever words you young people use today to talk about S things. I was gonna say shitty. Can I say shitty? Shitty things in your life. And a lot of them maybe, is every problem that you face a public issue? Is every problem require a sociological analysis to figure out why you have this problem? No. I mean, when I look at my own life, I say, well, one problem I've had is an anger management problem. I sometimes get angry when I don't need to be, and it doesn't help. Is that society's fault? Should I go be trying to figure out what's wrong with the history of America and the history of my social groups that make me an angry person? Maybe not. Maybe there's ways I can solve that problem without sociology. Like, I could go to a psychologist. I could get some medication or something like that. I did find out there's a term for it. It's called intermittent explosive disorder. Hopefully I don't unleash it on you guys. But no, I'm getting a handle on it. And one thing I stopped doing in July was drinking any alcohol at all. Not that I was an alcoholic, but it messes with your emotions and makes you less control of them. Anyway, so it's a private trouble, and I'm dealing with it privately. But what about other issues I face? Like I could say, well, one thing we don't have enough of is funding for education. I'm sitting here, part of my biography is I'm a professor, and I'm at a point in history, in American history, when there's not enough funding in California for higher education. And so like when I want to be able to do a Zoom meeting with a whiteboard so that I can record it and know when we don't have good internet, Dr. Flax, in that building, because they're getting ready to remodel this building. They've already remodeled the other ones, but we don't have good Wi-Fi in here. So you're gonna have trouble with your Zoom, they told me. So that is a public issue. I can't fix the funding of California for education by myself. I can't just go get some money so we have better Wi-Fi in here. I have to somehow think of it as a California problem, as a problem in California history right now, something to do with our legislature and our, the way we tax and things like that. And so what I'm saying is there's lots of issues we face that are just our own, and we probably should be dealing with them on our own. But there's times you find an issue that you've tried everything to fix it yourself, and you can't. And it's at those times when you might begin to say to yourself, maybe I need to analyze this thing sociologically. Who am I? What's my biography? What are all the social groups that I'm a part of? What are their histories? And could that help explain the issue I'm facing right now? For example, let's say you're trying to get a job. You need a job, you need some money, you want a job. And so you sent out 20 applications and nobody called you back. What should you do? What's your next step?
Put out 20 more.
So he's gonna try harder and put out more applications. So now you got 40 out there, still no calls.
Put out 80.
Okay, more? There's still no calls.
It's impossible.
Is it possible? There's nothing you could do. Is there a step you could take if you're trying to apply to jobs and not getting them?
Go there and talk to the manager in person.
So go do some footwork, actually show up and follow up and say, hey, I sent in an application. They say, yeah, we got it, it's on file. We'll give you a call if we need you, but please, don't call us. Have you ever heard that? Don't call us, we'll call you. Okay, now what?
Start a side hustle.
You could start another bit, start your own business. I was thinking more of traditional steps we say to college students. What should you do if you're trying to apply for a job? Are there things like what's involved in applying for a job that you might need to look at?
Update your resume.
Your resume might not be that good. Maybe when you're sending it out, people are just tossing it in the trash. So maybe I need to go to the career center at my college and show them my resume and get some tips on how to do a good resume. If I get any calls, I'm gonna hopefully get an interview, and so I need to maybe think about what are interviewing skills, do I have them, am I wearing, so I got a few interviews, I got 3 this time. I fixed my resume, I sent out 20 more applications, and I got 3 interviews, but they didn't work out, they never called me back. So now I go to the career center and they say, well, what's your deodorant? I mean, like, what are you wearing to these interviews? I just came in my pajamas, I didn't shower first. Well, you might want to shower first. You might want to put on a suit and tie or something so you look a little more impressive to them. Okay, I try all that. Now I still don't get a job. what could be, so what I'm saying is there's a certain point you hit where you're like, the thing I'm trying to change, I can't. So what could be the reason? Is it my deodorant? Is it my suit? Is it my handshake? Is it my resume? What is it? And if I've addressed all those and it didn't fix it, what else could it be? Well, you could say, now I need to start thinking about who I am. I'm a person trying to get a job right now. I'm a 22-year-old that needs money and I need a job. And I live in a society where the way you get money is by working. Okay, that's all true. But what's the history of that society? What's going on with it? Maybe, is there a reason, is there something that could be going on in history, something that's outside of you that explains why you can't get a job? What could be going on in America right now that might explain why somebody who wants to get a job can't get one? Have you ever heard of unemployment? Like why might it be that unemployment is high and it's hard to get any job? You ever heard of that happening?
Because there's a lot of greedflation going on right now, and there's a lot of people.
Well, yeah, I'm not talking about reality right now. I'm just hypothetically, if I was somebody trying to get a job and I couldn't get one, and I know it isn't my resume or my suit or my deodorant because I fixed all those, what might explain what's going on in my society that I can't get a job?
So a lot of people trying to get jobs outweigh the people or.
Okay, so the unemployment rate, for example, is something we'd want to look at. Maybe nobody's getting a job. Maybe it's 25% unemployment. And if everybody's trying to get a job, then I'm going to have trouble getting one because whenever I apply, there's 10,000 other applications and they're not even getting a chance to look at mine. If that were the case, that it was a recession or a depression or some reason why I can't get a job, then you could say, well, that's not my private trouble. I didn't cause that. I can't fix that by myself. There's a social issue going on here, a recession, a depression, an economic downturn, and that explains. Well, what if you look in the paper and it says recession's over, employment's back up, unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in years, and everybody's got work now, but you don't. And you're sending out jobs, you're sending out applications, you're still not getting a job. Is there something else you could look at, another public issue besides high unemployment rate and everyone's trying to get a job? What could I look at in my biography? So the society isn't in a recession, it isn't history that's the problem, at least of the whole society of America. But what about me? Who am I? Well, I start looking at my skin color and my gender. I'm a woman and I'm a Latina, I'm an African American woman, and I can't get a job. But I've noticed that the white girls I know got jobs and the white men I know got jobs, but I didn't get one. At that point, you might say, well, what's the history of Latino women or black women in this country? Is there a reason why Latino women or black women might not be getting jobs and white men might? Well, there is a history of discrimination and slavery and other things there. And so once you know that history, you might be able to understand a bit better why right now, I, as a Latino woman, I'm not getting a job, even though these other people are. And if that was the problem would be discrimination. You know, when we talk about public issues, things like a recession, you know, that would be a public issue. A depression, like we talked about, but so would discrimination and racism and sexism. Those can be reasons why people are facing troubles in their lives. And when Mills was saying this in the 1950s, people didn't have these words for what was wrong with America, like there's discrimination going on, or there's racism, or there's sexism. Like I said, everybody in the 1950s was expected to be a happy individual, pursuing their own individual goals. And when Mills came along and said all this, you know, it was kind of new at the time. This idea that you could criticize your society and look at it critically and say, maybe there's something wrong with society. Maybe it isn't only just me that is the problem with my life. Maybe there's forces working against me. And if that's the case, well, then what do I do? I mean, if I'm Rosa Parks and I say to myself, well, I really want to sit down on the bus today, but I'm a black person, that's my biography. I live in the South, I live in Alabama, which has this history of racism and slavery and Jim Crow laws. So right now, the reason I can't sit down isn't because I, Rosa Parks, did something wrong. It's because there's something wrong with the society I'm in that's not letting me sit down right now, even though I'm tired and want to sit down on the bus. And the problem isn't me, the problem is this thing called segregated buses in Birmingham. So what can you do when you realize my problem isn't me that I caused, it's something wrong with society? Just say, well, damn, I shouldn't have been born black. Stupid. I should have been born male. What an idiot I was. No, you can't change those things. So what can you change? Well, you could start saying, I need to change society. Maybe that's the thing that needs to change. That's the thing that needs to be fixed. And so the next step in this process of using your sociological imagination, so you're analyzing, you're saying, who am I? What are my social groups? My race, my class, my gender, my disability status, my nationality, my neighborhood, all these things we talked about that make you, you. They're not always all relevant to every particular problem, but if you're thinking about an issue like trying to get a job, what's going on in my country right now, in my neighborhood right now, in my social world right now that's affecting people like me. That's the analysis that you need to go through, but once you've done the analysis, the next step, according to Mills, is to find others. There's going to be, if it's really a problem that's a public issue and it isn't just your own issue that you created, then there will probably be others that feel similarly to you, that they too are up against this thing that they're trying to fix and they haven't been able to. But once people come together and say, yeah, you know what? I don't think it's a problem that I'm black, but I think what the problem is these laws that say that black people can't sit down on the bus in the front. And if other people agree with me and say, yeah, you know what, that's not fair, that's not good, let's change that. Well, then you're on the road to maybe changing society in some way. But to do that, you'd need to take some sort of collective action. Group action. You can't solve this public issue by yourself as an individual, but you can solve it how? Well, one type of collective action would be to form an organization. Like you said, I'm going to start a side hustle. Well, maybe you could find some other unemployed people and say, let's start a business. If we start our own little business, then we could solve our problem of not being employed, we'll employ ourselves. That's one possibility, is to start an organization. And a lot of people have done that when they faced a private trouble. For example, there was a woman whose daughter was killed by a drunk driver. And it turned out the guy who killed her got very little time in jail. And she thought, this woman, you know, we have a problem in society if people can kill people in their car when they're drunk and then no person's dead forever, but the person who did it, you know, doesn't get much time. So she decided to start an organization, and she called it Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And we still have Mothers Against Drunk Driving as an organization that has successfully pushed for change and raised the penalties for drunk driving, lowered the blood alcohol limit that's allowed in cars, really raised awareness about the problem of drunk driving and reduced the problem of drunk driving in the society. And so that's just one example. Rosa Parks was another one. I mean, not just her, but the whole civil rights movement was people coming together saying, hey, it's not right that we're being treated this way, and the only way we're going to solve it is if we take collective action. What collective action can we take to make sure the buses will let us sit down? Well, they said, what if we boycott the buses in Birmingham, Alabama? If all these black people who ride the buses, if we just don't ride them and don't pay to ride the buses, maybe they'll think better of that rule. And so for a whole year, the black people and white people who were sympathetic in Montgomery, Alabama said, we're not riding the buses. And so how do you get around? Well, it wasn't easy for them. They were poor black people. They had to do things like stay at each other's houses, carpool, walk together, march together, and stuff like that. So for a whole year, they boycotted the buses, refused to ride the buses. And the city of Birmingham's like, no, we're going to have segregation. Got to have white people in the front of the bus and black people at the back of the bus. That's just the right way it is, and it can never be any different. And for a whole year, they fought it, and then finally, the civil rights people won, and the city of Birmingham said, okay, we'll change the rule. Anybody who rides the bus can sit wherever they want. So that's how things change, not just by people saying, I wish it would change, or it didn't just happen because Martin Luther King got up and gave a speech saying, I have a dream. That the speech brings people together and gets them to take collective action, but the collective action has to be things like a boycott or a sit-in or something that actually changes something. Yeah.
Is collective action a key term?
Well, the key term here is sociological imagination. So if I were to ask you to define sociological imagination, I'd want you to talk about who is C. Wright Mills. I'd want you to talk about cheerful robots. I'd want you to talk about analyzing the intersection between history and biography. I'd want you to talk about finding others and taking collective action. So all of this is the definition of the key term, sociological imagination. So that's the key term, is sociological imagination, but there's a lot to it, is what I'm trying to get at. And so Mills, like I said, was writing in the 1950s, which was, we now remember, as a pretty quiet time. Another way to define a cheerful robot would be as mindless conformity. Just going along with what you think society expects of you. To conform is to go along with the rules. We're going to talk about conformity and deviance later in the class. But mindless conformity would just be sort of unthinking, without questioning it, just doing what you're told. And Mills said, I don't think people are healthy and happy that way. Healthy and happy humans, push back on things that are being told to them and question it and challenge it and try to find the best way. They don't just do what they're told by the powerful. And so what happened after Mills wrote all this? Well, the 1960s, when we think of the 1960s in America, those were not a quiet time in America. What happened in the 1960s? A bunch of social movements. So collective action can be things like an organization. It can be an action like a boycott or a sit-in or a march or a rally. But over time, when these things accumulate, they become what's called a social movement. When lots of people are coming together to identify a public issue or set of public issues and say, hey, we want to change this about our country or about our state or our community. And so the 60s are a time we think of, can you think of any social movements that became very prominent and active in the 1960s?
The anti-war movement?
Anti-war movement. The first one was really the civil rights movement. So Martin Luther King and people saying we need to change these laws in the South, but also in the North. There's a lot of ways non-white people are discriminated against. And they don't have rights. They don't have the same rights in the law as white people. So people began to change that. And then the women's movement too. A lot of women began to say, hey, we deserve more in opportunity than to just be housewives and serving men and serving society, but to be independent, free people ourselves who don't have to depend on a man to have a good life. And the anti-war movement, yes, so the Vietnam War was going on, and that war fell heavily on young people, mainly people 18 to 25. If you were a college student, you didn't have to fight in Vietnam War, but in those days, the voting age was 21. So if you think about that, if you were 18 to 21, if you were a male, 18, 19, 20, they could force you to go fight in Vietnam and go die for your country or kill for your country, but you didn't have any say in that matter. You didn't have any vote to vote on whether the country should be at war. And so if you remember, America fought a revolution because of something called taxation without representation, this idea that we shouldn't get taxed by the King of England if we don't have a say over how the taxes money is used. Well, young people in that time said, we shouldn't have to die for our country if we don't have any say over what wars our country is in or not. And so they fought for a change in the voting law. So nowadays you get to vote when you're 18. And a lot of 18-year-olds don't vote, and I don't know if you guys are getting ready to vote in the upcoming election in November. People are saying it's one of the most important elections in American history. My job as a sociologist is to try and excite you and care about voting and care about making change in your society, or not making change, if that's your biography. But anyway, I hope you are paying some attention to politics. If not, this class is a chance to do that a little bit. But anyway, so they changed the voting laws, and so young people got to vote. And then there was also a gay and lesbian transgender movement that began going in the 1960s. So the 1960s were not a quiet time, and I'm not saying Mills was the one who started all these movements, but it was a time when people began to say, you shouldn't just be a passive citizen and just accept what your government says or accept what other powerful people say. You should be a critical citizen who's always kind of challenging the powers that be. And one thing you can say about America today is we might be divided, but we're definitely a place where everybody feels they have the right to challenge the powerful people, challenge professors, challenge presidents, challenge CEOs. And so you have people all over challenging things they don't like, which you could say is, is good in the sense that they're trying to make the country better. Everybody's trying to make America great. But for some people, America was great before these social movements, before women and non-white people and gay people came out and said, hey, we want more rights and more centrality in our society. Some people think it was better when gays were in the closet, black people were discriminated against, women were housewives. But there's a lot of other people that think America's better now that those things happened, that young people got more rights, gay people got rights, black people got rights. So anyway, but sociology says, all of us can use our ability to think about who we are and the social groups that we're members of, and think about how those groups are being treated in the society. And if there are injustices or problems with how people are being treated, that it's good and right for people to call attention to that and come together and challenge the powerful in their society. So even if you don't go on to study sociology, you can always be working on your understanding of who you are. Who are my social groups? If I have a racial group, a gender group, a disability group, a religion, understanding those groups and the histories of them, understanding how those today's history is affecting those things, that makes you a more knowledgeable person of who you are and more able to navigate the problems. So a lot of people have felt that was a useful concept over time, is this idea of analyzing the intersections of history and biography. But like I said, is every problem a social problem? Should we always be blaming society for every issue that we face? And no, we shouldn't. But where then, if a problem is a public problem or a social problem, where is that problem? How do we think about it? And so that's the second key term, is social structure. Social structure is a term I'll be using a lot throughout this class. And it's a term that sociologists love to use, but they don't always define it very well. And it can be hard to know, what do you mean when you say social structure? What are you talking about? And so I like to clarify at the beginning of the class what we mean by that. Your textbook has a definition of social structure that I don't like. They say social structure is the boundaries, the patterns, they say, the patterns that provide boundaries to social life. The patterns that provide boundaries to social life. I think that's so vague and so general that I don't really even know what it means. But we do say structural a lot, sociologists, and we think we know what we mean when we say it, so what are we talking about? Well, I think to really understand it, structure, you have to pair it with another term, which usually when we say structure, we mean not this other thing. And this other thing is culture. And so really, when I say social structure, it's two terms I'm getting us to think about, structure and culture. When we say a problem is a social problem or a public issue, and we say it's not inside ourselves, well then where is that problem? We could say that problem, like discrimination, it's in the structure of society. Or a recession has to do with the structure of society. And so a lot of social problems that we would try to fix are structural problems, but what does that mean? I think structure, when we talk about structure, and these are just concepts, they exist in our head, but they're ways of thinking about the social world. So when we talk about structure, what are we thinking of? What are we thinking about? We're thinking about who has what. When you look at a social group or a society, like this classroom, I could say there's a structure to this classroom. There's who has what. You have that desk. she has that desk. You have those clothes on, she has those clothes on. I have the authority as the professor. I'm up here with the professor, I have these rights and powers, and you have these rights and powers as a student, and they're different from what I have. So we have a structure to this classroom. And in a society too, we can ask who has what. We can ask, for example, who has money and who doesn't? Who has power and who doesn't? Or how much do they have? And where do they have it? And how do they have it? And jobs, who has jobs and who doesn't? And who has access to education and healthcare? And things like that. Transportation. Housing. We're talking about the structure of society. We're not really talking about what's going on inside of people's minds or inside their hearts or anything like that. We're just talking about what they have or don't have. I have the power to give grades. You have the power to get a grade. That's the structure of this classroom, of this situation. But when we look at a society, we can ask, where's the money and where's it concentrated and where's there less of it, who has power and what are they doing with it, who doesn't. But that's only one side of the coin of looking at a society, because to look at a society really completely, we also need to kind of think about what's going on in the minds of the people in it. And what do they care about? What do they value? What do they think? What do they believe? And all of that falls under the heading of culture. So culture refers to who thinks or feels what. So when I'm analyzing the society structure, I'm just looking at the sort of material things people have or don't have. But when I'm analyzing the culture of a society or a social group, I'm thinking about what's going on in the minds, the thoughts, and the hearts, the feelings of the people in that society. And so what kinds of things fall under this category? Well, things like values. Do you value hard work? Or do you think fun is the most important thing? Or things like attitudes, your beliefs. Do you believe the world is flat or do you believe it's round? Do you believe, men are stronger than women or that women can be as strong as men? I mean, what are your beliefs? Are you Christian? Are you Jewish? Are you Muslim? And by the way, religion too is obviously a cultural thing. Anything that we can't really see or touch, but it motivates people's action, motivates what they do, are things that we could call cultural. They're inside our hearts and minds, like our values, our religion, our ideologies. So when we analyze the culture of a group of people, if I was to analyze the culture of this classroom, I don't think we have much of a culture. We've only been meeting for 2 weeks and we don't have many beliefs that we all share in common or values. I mean, I can assume that if we're all here, we value education, for example, or something like that. But we're not really a strong social group, really. We're just a collection of individuals that happen to all come here in this class right now. Maybe by the end of the term, we'll have more of a sense of a group that we care, we know each other and care about each other. I don't know, sometimes that happens in a classroom. But to have a social group, people have to spend some time together and develop these things over time. But when we're trying to analyze problems in society, like if you're trying to understand discrimination, or here, I'll take a problem like teen pregnancy. Where I'm from, I grew up in Santa Barbara, California, not a very high amount of teen pregnancy in that city, in that town. But here in Linda, California, pretty high rate of teen pregnancy traditionally. So as a sociologist, one of your tasks is to try and figure out why, and I'm getting into more professional sociology, not a regular person sociology, but a capital S sociology, I'm going to call it. You might ask the question, well, why does the town of Linda, California have a higher teen pregnancy rate than the town of Santa Barbara, California? And you could certainly look at the structure of it and ask, well, does it have to do with the poverty rates? Like, is poverty higher in Linda than in California, in Santa Barbara? Yeah. Does it have to do with power and who has access to things like, knowledge about birth control or how to use it and things like that? Or what about women, strong women can fend off advances of older men, but in a poor rural area, sometimes people have less power to protect themselves from getting pregnant and things like that. If people have schools and school to go to, they don't always want to spend a lot of time, messing around romantically with some dude. They're busy with their job and their career and things like that. But if you don't have any of those things, like in Santa Barbara, people have access to education, jobs, money, and the teen pregnancy rate's low. In a town like Linda, where these things are lower, we could, as a sociologist, maybe theorize that the reason there's higher teen pregnancy rate is because there's less in terms of structure, less money, less opportunity, less education, less access to knowledge and things like that. On the other hand, we can certainly ask about, well, what's going on in the hearts and minds of people that make them act a certain way? In the town of Santa Barbara, for example, individual achievement maybe is highly valued. When a girl gets pregnant and she's 15, people are like, man, what did you do to yourself? Why did you do that? Whereas in some communities, if a girl gets pregnant, they're like, yay, you're a mom now. Perfect, that's what girls should be doing. That's exactly what you should be doing. So it depends on your value. If you value momness and only that for a woman, then maybe being pregnant at 15 doesn't seem like a problem. If you value careers and advancement, then you say, well, a girl getting pregnant at 15, she's hurting that, so she shouldn't have done that. So if you're trying to understand why does Santa Barbara have a lower rate of teen pregnancy than Linda, we could certainly ask structurally what's different about those two places. But we could also ask culturally, what are the values and attitudes and beliefs people have? Religion, for example, we know that people who are deeply religious are more likely to get pregnant earlier and married earlier than people who are more secular. So there are things to look at inside people's heads and hearts that help explain why they're doing what they're doing. But we as sociologists are often trying to figure out which one matters more and how do they affect each other? For example, so you could say if there's a lot of poverty in Linda, that helps explain the culture of people thinking having babies when you're young is okay, or that running around with your boyfriend is the funnest thing to be doing, because there's not a lot else to do. A lot of people claim that rural areas don't have much going on in them in terms of structure, fun things to go do. So if there's not much fun to do, people end up hanging out with each other and, then babies get born. So you could say this culture reflects the structure, but at the same time, the culture helps cause that structure. I mean, if you have a community where people think it's okay to get pregnant when you're 15, then companies, for example, aren't going to want to invest in that community because people are always dropping out of work and not getting their work done. And so you're like, well, let's not put our Costco there in Linda because we won't be able to get reliable employees because they're a bunch of poor people with poor people's values acting like poor people. So which is it? Do they act like poor people because structurally they don't have enough? Or do they not have enough because they act like poor people? It's a cycle, is what I'm saying. A lot of problems that we study in sociology, trying to figure out which is it. Is it because people don't have enough or because they think a certain way? And the two kind of go together in a lot of cases. We'll see that a lot, that structure and culture are kind of connected things. That what people have or don't have is connected to what they think or feel or don't think and feel. But the two influence each other. So what you have over time can be influenced by what you think and feel, and what you think and feel can be influenced by what you have or don't have. So anyway, it's a complicated notion, but we'll be using structure and culture a lot as we think about things like, well, why don't young people vote, even though a lot of them got the right to vote in the 60s? A lot of sociologists, including myself, have asked, what would it take to get more young people to be more involved, more engaged in the politics of their society? One idea is if you could get the famous people they like to promote voting and civic engagement, then people would want to do that. I'm bringing that up because I don't know if you've been following the whole NFL thing, but there's a woman named, what's her name? Taylor Swift. Anyway, she successfully got a lot of her fans, Swifties, to register to vote, 35,000 people. And a lot of people who are pro-Trump guys don't like Swifties registering to vote because they think they're gonna vote for, Democrats and, progressive people, not for conservative people. And so they've been putting Taylor Swift on the NFL games, and a lot of pro-Trump people are very upset that they're showing Taylor Swift instead of what, I don't know. It's a big scandal going on, or it's a big argument. Obviously, you're not paying attention to it, so I won't dwell on it. But the question is, how do you get young people to care about their society? And certainly, there are structural reasons why young people are not very involved in politics. They're too busy with things like making sure they get through school, making sure they get a job, making sure they get a place to live. If you're so focused on just surviving, it's going to be hard to care too much about what Biden or Trump or somebody's doing far away in Washington. But there can also be a culture of apathy, of people thinking politics doesn't matter, or I'd much rather go play video games than pay attention to politics, or I'd much rather just go eat or something. And so, anyway, so culture and structure go together, or they often influence each other, is an idea that we'll be coming back to a lot in this class. All right, so that's another sociological term. Well, how do we know if a problem is structural or cultural, or if we're analyzing a place like Yuba Sutter and trying to figuring out why people in this community have teen pregnancy problems, or if we're comparing it to Santa Barbara and wanting to know what's the difference between these two places? A third key term we need to know is the term social facts. So one of the questions we're going to address as this class goes on is, what makes sociology sociology? I mean, how is it different from other ways of studying people? Because psychologists also study people, and biologists in a way, I mean, they definitely study the human body and study what makes us tick and stuff like that. And so, for example, a lot of people point to biology to explain why people act the way they do, like their testosterone as a hormone that affects their behavior. We in sociology never talk about testosterone because that's not a sociological fact. It's a biological one. It's what biologists study. And we don't, a lot of you describe yourself as introverts and extroverts on the first day of class. Those are psychological terms, and psychology studies personality, like what goes on in people's brains and their own personal history that made them act a certain way. But sociology, we don't care that much about your personality. And yet, your biography matters to you, but as a sociologist, we're not always studying people's individual experiences. What we study are social facts, which means aggregate behavior. To aggregate something is to bring multiple things together, smaller things, into one big thing. Like if you ever work in concrete, there's a substance called aggregate, which is gravel, a bunch of rocks put together. If it's one rock, it's a rock, but if you put a bunch of rocks together, it's aggregate. And if you take one person's vote on something, that's their vote. But if you put a bunch of votes together, it's called aggregating their votes to see who they chose. Well, same with sociology. We're not that interested in one person's behavior and one person's biography. But we are interested in aggregate behavior, what are known, for example, as rates of behavior. So like I said, if your sister got pregnant when she was 15, it was a tragedy for your family or whatever, you've been dealing with that. As a sociologist, I would say, well, that's all sad, but as a sociologist, it doesn't really matter to me. As a human, it does. As a friend of yours, it does. But as a sociologist, that's not what we study, an individual person's experience and why they got pregnant and stuff like that. But what we would be interested in is the teen pregnancy rate of Linda, California, or Marysville. A rated behavior looks like this, like X out of 1,000 people. If you took 1,000 people in Yuba Sutter, 1,000 girls, 15 or, between the ages of 12 and 18, what number of them are pregnant right now? If you could somehow get that information, pregnant or have had a kid in the last 9 months, then we could say, That's the pregnancy rate. That's the percentage of girls in this area that have been pregnant or got pregnant recently. And you can compare rates, comparing like the rate in California. If you took 1,000 girls in Santa Barbara, 1,000 girls in Santa Barbara, how many of them are pregnant right now? 1,000 in here. The crime rate is another one we study a lot. How much murder is happening right now per 1,000 people? If I took 1,000 people, how many of them got murdered this year? 1,000 wouldn't be a big enough number to get a rate, but out of 100,000 people, how many are murdered? And you can compare cities and towns. You can compare years. How many this year out of 100,000 died from murder versus last year versus the year before that? The good news there, by the way, is that our murder rate's much lower than it used to be. Americans, Trump likes to say Americans carnage and there's all this bloodshed and Americans are killing each other. The American crime rate and violent crime rate is much lower nowadays than it used to be. So when he says he wants to make America great again, I say like, well, if you're talking about crime and violence, it's much better than it used to be. But anyway, so rates of behavior are something we study. A good example that we need to mention here is suicide. We're going to learn about Emil Durkheim, one of the founders of sociology. And when he founded sociology, he was trying to prove that we need sociology, that we need something that doesn't exist yet. And he was writing way back when, in the 1860s. And back then there was no sociology. There was nobody studying rates of behavior like the crime rate or things like that. And crime was one of the first things that began to be collected as information, as data. But people weren't really studying it. And Durkheim noticed that people were collecting data on why people die. Or if you look at people who are recorded in the books that the police keep and the government keeps of who died, why, and when, Durkheim began looking at, well, who died from suicide? And if you start looking at the suicide rate, you could say, well, is that a psychological question or a sociological question? Like, why would somebody kill themselves? At a certain level, it's a very psychological thing. Like, why would somebody take their own life? It's a very personal, individual thing. And at that level, yes, psychologists do study suicide. And there already was psychology when Durkheim came on the scene. But he said, there's nobody studying suicide rates. Like if you want to know why one person committed suicide, what happened to them, what happened right before they died, what was their life story, psychologists were studying that. Like what would lead a single person, that person, to commit suicide? But no one was asking, why, for example, do, if you looked at Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, so 3 religious groups, and he was in France, right, in the 1860s. So within that one country, you have different religious groups. And if you go look at, well, what percentage out of 1,000 Protestants, how many committed suicide last year? Out of 1,000 Catholics, how many committed suicide last year? Out of 1,000 Jews, how many committed? What Durkheim noticed once he started looking at these rates is that, I'm not going to get all into the quantity, the numbers of it, but he said Protestants have a high suicide rate. And Catholics and Jews tend to have a low suicide rate. And we'll talk more about religion later in this class, and I think some students are confused by the term Christian, Catholic is Christian, and Protestant is Christian. And if you're Methodist or Baptist or Episcopalian, there's a whole bunch of what are called sects. There are types of Protestantism, but Protestantism is a type of Christianity, and Catholicism is a type of Christianity. So they're all Christian. Judaism is different, Islam is different, but they're all kind of related too. But the point being is, in Europe at that time, these were some of the main religious groups, and Durkheim happened to notice that there was a persistent difference in their suicide rates. It wasn't just one year that it was like this, it was like this year after year. And it wasn't just in France, as he began looking at the suicide rates in Switzerland, and Germany, and England, and Spain, and Russia, wherever there was these 3 religious groups, you would find that Catholics and Jews had a low suicide rate, and Protestants had a higher one. And so he began to ask, what could explain this? As a sociologist, that's like a research question. In fact, these are the social facts And another key term, I'll just throw it in here because our fourth key term is theory. And what's a theory? A theory is an attempt to explain data. So these social facts are data, they're information, and a theory is an attempt to try and explain it. Like, why is this happening? Why are Protestants committing suicide at a high rate and Jews and Catholics at a lower rate? What could be the explanation? And again, if you're trying to explain why one given person committed suicide, that's not a sociological question, that's a psychological question. And if you went into each of these groups and asked, like, why did John Smith commit suicide? Why did Juan Castellano commit suicide? Why did Saul Goldberg commit suicide? They might all have the exact same reason. They all did it for the same reason, which was that their wives died recently and they were all lonely and miserable, so they all killed themselves. Okay, so for psychological reasons, people might kill themselves for, like, out of grief. But that's a psychological reason, and that doesn't explain why would Protestants be committing suicide more than Catholics and Jews? And unless you could explain why their grief level is higher, but there's multiple reasons why individuals commit suicide. Grief's one. Another one, which weirdly, is when people suddenly their life changes for good reasons, like you just won the lottery. Lottery winners are actually more likely to commit suicide than other people, because it suddenly changed your life in ways you didn't expect, and suddenly you're not as happy as you were before. And so, but anyway, the individual reasons why people commit suicide is not what Durkheim was interested in. What he wanted to know is what could explain why Protestants commit suicide more than Catholics and Jews. And it can't just be that they experience, changes in their lives more frequently or grief more frequently. There must be something true about the group. We're trying to understand the groups, not the individuals. Something that distinguishes these groups from each other. And so what could it be? Well, what Durkheim ended up saying was that the difference was social solidarity. And social solidarity isn't yet one of our key terms, but it will be later in the class. Solidarity is the question of how tight is your group? Are you a tight-knit social group, or are you a loose social group? Tight-knit social groups look after each other. They make sure the individuals in them do what the group expects of those individuals. Catholics, for example, tend to be a tighter-knit social group than Protestants. Why? Because of how the religion is practiced. If you want to be a good Catholic, you have to go to church, and you have to talk to your priest, and you have to go to Mass, and you have to be together with the congregation, and sing songs together, and pray together. And it's a group activity. And if you were a depressed Catholic because your wife just died, the group's going to know about it because you stopped coming to church, you were just staying home all the time. And so people start coming and looking out for you and going, where's John? He hasn't been coming to church, he hasn't been talking to the priest. And so the group, which they call a flock, a flock of sheep, the sheep come and say, hey, loose sheep, where are you? Come back to the group. And if you get taken back into the fold, as they say, back into the group of sheep, you can be protected better. Being Jewish too, I can tell you, since I'm Jewish, but I'm not a practicing Jewish person, also involves a lot of group activity. You have to go to temple, you have to go several times a week, you have to pray together with other people. The group's going to know if things are not right with you. And they're going to come check on you, and they're going to make sure that you're brought back into the group activity. Protestantism, though, and the reason it's called Protestants is they protested against the Catholic Church. They said, we don't want to do things the way the Pope tells us to do. We're going to start our own version of Christianity that doesn't do what the Pope tells us to do. And so Protestants said, you don't need to have a congregation or a priest to talk to God. You can talk to God directly. You can get out your Bible and pray to God directly, and God will hear you, and you can have your own personal relationship with God, and you don't need to go to the church or the temple. And so Protestants over time became people who spent a lot of time by themselves. Not much social solidarity. If you're spending all your time in your cabin chopping wood and cooking your food and reading your Bible, but you're never going to a church or never hanging out with other people, then you're all by yourself most of the time, very individualistic. Whereas most Catholics and Jews in Europe in Durkheim's time led very social lives, very much part of a group checking in on you. And so social solidarity, which you could call like social glue. It's the glue that binds an individual to his group, that makes you feel connected to your group, bonded to your group. Durkheim says, well, that helps, that's his theory. That explains why do Protestants have it? They have high suicide rate, low social solidarity. So this is their suicide rate, and this is their social solidarity rate, and they have low social solidarity. But Jews and Catholics, high. And so his theory was that one of the reasons that we should be, one purpose of a social group is to keep individuals in line, to keep individuals behaving the way the group expects them to behave. And if you don't have a strong social group keeping you in line, you are free to do whatever you want to yourself, which could be pretty self-destructive kinds of things. Durkheim was really worried that in our modern world, people were too individualistic, that people are making their own choices about how to live, and they drink too much alcohol, and they take too much drugs, and they do bad things to each other, when really we need a strong social group to guide us and guide our behavior. So we'll talk more about Durkheim later, but for now you see that comparing groups on the basis of something like their rate of behavior, their rate of suicide, their rate of teen pregnancy, their crime rate, their unemployment rate. These are what we call statistics nowadays, by the way. And statistics are one of the hearts of sociology. And they always say, don't become a statistic. Well, I will give you that advice right now. Don't become a statistic as you leave school today, meaning don't contribute to our crime rate or our accident rate or unwed motherhood rate or whatever. There's rain going to happen soon, so I would say accident rate on the road is a rate I'd be worried about. I guess I'm gonna let you go, but so far I'm trying not to get upset and have my, what's it called, intermittent explosive disorder. But I want you guys to participate. I want you to raise your hand. I want you to have thoughts and disagreements and opinions and things you want to share with the class. I know it's hard because COVID happened. And I think COVID made us all less social beings. We all became individualistic, staying at home, not part of our social group. And so it becomes very hard to then relate socially to other people again. But sociology says you will be a sick puppy if you don't. You may end up committing suicide one day if you don't have a strong social group. So please come to this class ready to be social and at least raising your hand and paying attention. But we have more key terms to talk about, and we'll come back to those on Thursday. All right, thank you. And have a good day. You too. If I need to sign something, you can come talk to me about that. Let me just stop the recording here. Wait.
Have a good day.
You too.